All right. Thanks, Haley. So hi everyone again. We're again so glad you're able to join us today for a conversation on advocacy and resilience strategies for communities that face natural disaster challenges. I'm excited to begin introducing the amazing panel we have with us today. So I'll go alphabetically. Catherine is an atmospheric and oceanic scientist PhD student and Eugene V. Cota Robles Fellow at UCLA. Essence is a biological sciences PhD student at the University of South Carolina and is also a fellow on CDLS's policy working group. We have Olivia, who's a geography and data science student at the University of Florida, specializing in geospatial systems and GIS. Again, another fellow on our CDLS policy working group. And then last but not least, Samuel is the development director for the San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians with interdisciplinary experiences in land restoration, entertainment, and higher education. But that's enough from me. Why don't we kick this discussion off and let our panelists properly introduce themselves and maybe share a little bit about their research and or policy experiences and how you began doing this work. Um, Kat, would you maybe like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, and so excited to talk about community advocacy and natural disasters in our communities. Yeah, I'm Kat. I'm in my final year of my PhD at UCLA. I'm in the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences department, specifically studying atmospheric chemistry. So I do a lot of lab experiments, do a lot of research. And I'm looking at fast reacting chemical interactions at the onset of cloud droplet formation. But I've kind of shifted gears since UCLA was kind of directly in the path of the 2025 LA wildfires. I've shifted gears into looking at air quality impacts during the LA wildfires, specifically looking at the emissions from the smoke and what kind of trace metals come from that. I'm a first gen student. My parents immigrated from Poland. And yeah, I came to UCLA kind of non traditionally. I started at UCSD, UC San Diego, for my bachelor's, and I wanted to do architecture. And then I kind of found environmental science and chemistry because I wasn't really loving that major. So that's kind of how I hopped into that side. Was really interested in the environment and obviously climate change. And then, yeah, took a kind of 2 year gap year and worked at a national lab where they really encouraged me to go to grad school because wasn't sure I wanted to go or if I could get in. But here I am. And yeah, excited to talk about my work and yeah, communities.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we are so glad you are here. Essence?
Thank you, Matthew. All right, so hi everyone. I'm Essence Tornabene. I am a second year PhD student at the University of South Carolina. My research actually focuses on spatial dynamics and environmental stressors of microalgal communities and estuarine ecosystems. But I have been a CDLS fellow for about 2 years now, and I have spent the last 6 to 7 months working with the policy working group. So I can confidently say that with my time with the policy working group, that has pushed me to grow in my understanding with science and environmental policy. And I was the legislative tracker for our policy working group through CDLS. And I began noticing a reoccurring issue across the southeastern states around hurricane and flooding insurance, particularly for coastal communities and our lower income communities. And that pretty much what brings me here today. So thank you for having me.
Yes, and I've definitely had the pleasure of speaking with Essence here and there in that policy working group. Um, Samuel, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Meija in my language. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Samuel Lopez. I am a descendant of the first people that inhabited the Los Angeles Basin, Orange County, and the four Southern Channel Islands. So Gabriel and Tongass and Gabriel Banish Indians. Yeah, so my background is not necessarily in Western science, but I am an indigenous scientist. Because, as Native people, especially again, like um, in where we are and the time that we are, it kind of just forces us to kind of be a little bit of everything. I actually have a BA in English. I went to DC for school, moved back to born and raised in LA, moved back to LA, then moved across state lines to Arizona and San Diego doing things like admissions work, entertainment stuff. But then, yeah, really kind of getting into more so land restoration and policy work, just being interested in, who we are culturally. And so then that kind of like really snowballed into doing really good work with a land conservancy up in Altadena right before the Altadena fires hit, and actually removing, I think the count was like 75 eucalyptus trees without herbicide. And therefore like saving like 3 or 4 different structures around the area. And then, yeah, really just kind of diving into traditional ecological knowledge and focusing on how to implement those things and work on tribal access, again, cross environmental stewardship, as well as to just, again, just in everything in the urban environment. Because we as a tribe are not federally recognized, we are state recognized. And if anybody has questions, we can get into that. But yeah, just been doing really good work. And then again, like in that kind of policy work, got connected with CDLS, and have been really, again, fortunate to work with so many amazing different people with the organization. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yes, that's amazing. And then lastly, Olivia?
Hello. Thank you so much, Matthew. And I'm so honored to be on this panel with everyone. Um, my name is Olivia, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Florida. And my family and I actually are originally from New Orleans, but we had to leave because of Hurricane Katrina, and we've never really been able to go back to our where we were living there before. And also growing up in South Florida, we constantly saw climate impacts year after year. And the combination of these experiences growing up has really motivated me to pursue a career in climate resilience, especially for coastal communities. And at the University of Florida, I work on participatory science research that aims to empower communities to crowdsource data that can contribute to better understandings of human environment interactions. And outside of that, I also volunteer with the nonprofit team Rubicon, where I help with GIS mapping and data support for on the ground response to hurricanes and other disasters. And beyond that, I'm a visual artist, and my art that kind of combined data about climate disasters was what brought me to become a CDLS Fellow around 1 year ago. So that's a bit about me. And again, I'm very honored to be on this panel.
Yeah, I'm so glad we had you guys introduce yourselves because my introduction for you was definitely not even close to capturing the amazing that work that you all contribute. So I guess the first question I'm wondering is like from your perspective, and that could be either through your personal story or through research and policy works that you've done, what do you see as the biggest challenges that communities are currently facing as the climate-related disasters they face become either more frequent or more severe?
I can start us off. So just from what I've seen, the biggest problem that challenges communities is that it's becoming either too expensive or too risky for our families to stay in their homes following these natural disaster events. So while storms increase, financial help for these families is disappearing. And traditionally, it is expected that our property insurance should provide a reliable safety net for coastal recovery. However, insurance prices are now either doubling or tripling in price, and even some companies are now refusing to provide these coverages anymore. So just for example, in the Southeastern region, which is what I focus in, it has been confirmed that over around 15 plus major insurance companies have now withdrawn or restricted these type of coverages to our lower income coastal communities. And then, sorry, some other challenges I've noticed is that we're starting to see how our built community can no longer keep up with our natural one. So our drainage systems, the type of roads we're currently building, the power grids that we've designed, were pretty much built for the climate 30, 50 years ago, and it's no longer our reality now, especially with, sorry. with the frequency of these events and how our recovery time after these events is being cut shorter and shorter. But also, and I'm pretty sure Olivia can speak on this as well, but family displacement is one of the major challenges that we see. A lot of the help that are given to these families after these natural disaster events is not necessarily focused on how they can help rebuild and provide that safety net that was previously needed. Rather, they've been influencing families to leave their homes behind and or move altogether. And this is also known as like a buyout program, which is very familiar with FEMA. This is also known under like legislative ruling as property acquisition as another word. And that's where our federal government is trying to reduce that long-term disaster risk to these communities by requesting and funding them to move instead of rebuilding what they had already had, especially if they've been there generations after generations.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Yeah, because you're seeing that in Altadena specifically. A lot of the homes that people have kind of like passed down from generation to generation are gone now. And especially in Altadena, again, different from the Palisades, that Palisades, some people were either able to go to a second home or able to rebuild immediately. But then like the financial recovery efforts were only very short-term focused with no real again traction for long-term care. And so when we again like see all these families who not only are dealing with their home being gone and like camping in their lots, but also to dealing with like all of the different problems that came with like lead piping and carcinogens in the air that again came up with the flames, and especially people who are still present. And then same thing too with people who didn't lose their homes. Just the amount of smoke that came into their homes that is still like living in their walls is just again one of those things that we are constantly having to remind people that those are still prevalent issues because there are now that kind of like the immediacy of the fires have receded. Those kind of issues are still prevalent, but there's not a lot of I would say I guess like forward action now that we're getting farther and farther away from the immediate disaster itself.
Yeah, I would also echo what Essence and Samuel are saying. Looking into the wildfires that LA recently had, you do see a lot of our wildfire research that we know of and emissions that we know of are from wildland burning. And so we've kind of transformed now to this kind of wildland urban interface where our wildfires are encroaching into our urban areas, and we don't know much about the pollution that's being emitted there. So there's definitely a need to understand what our communities are breathing in, inhaling, and what they're going to be living with, and how our lands are going to be kind of transformed by that, right? Also, what Essence was saying about insurance, right? A lot of homeowners' policies were canceled right before the fires, just because we know now, we have these drought intense periods, right, from lack of rain, and then we have these periods too where we get a lot of rain, and so it kind of provides this fuel for the fire, and then it dries out, and then we have these intense wind periods that fires ignite, and they kind of trickle into our basins. So it's kind of this problem that I think comes from all sides, right? We have insurance problems, we have climate problems, and our communities are impacted. And a lot of the communities that are lower income communities end up being the ones that were impacted the most. Because like Samuel said, Palisades community, a lot of these people might have alternatives or other ways to get around it.
And I would also like to add on to that I think a really big challenge as we're facing these disasters is that there's a lot of dread and hopelessness. And I think that can really deter a lot of people from like taking action because they feel that there might not be anything that they can do. And I think that a lot of the like imagery and the stories that we hear about climate are so rooted in just the negative. And I think that Um, this is something that I really appreciate about like environmental joy or like bringing art and culture and creativity into how we respond to climate disasters and building climate resiliency. I think that there's so much value in that and just making it not something that people should fear, but rather something that we can build community around.
Yeah, I especially appreciate that last note. Something that I studied when actually Haley was one of my instructors was this sense of eco anxiety, especially amongst a lot of Gen Z and millennials. But we have touched a little bit because you're all sort of situated in different geographic areas. We have people from LA specific as well as the Southeast. And since we're bringing together those different perspectives, I'm wondering what stands out to you about the way that these climate-related challenges show up in different places. What are key distinctions? And then what feels shared amongst these communities? What are some lessons that we can learn that can be applied no matter what specific challenges you're facing, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or flooding?
I guess we can go in the same order that we did the last one. Yeah, so because I'm on the southeastern coast, I feel like it doesn't matter where we are. I feel like the shared issue, which is something we've all talked about, is human and family displacement. Whether it is a fire out west or like a storm here in the south, the most vulnerable people are always the ones that are pushed out of their communities first. And we look across the South region alone, a lot of these patterns are unique to specific areas. So, for example, our coastal communities are facing very different risks than our inland regions. So, like storm surges, delayed flooding, saltwater intrusion, or like rapid insurance premiums increasing, or like Kat had said, sometimes they'll just not have that coverage anymore right before they know that a natural disaster is on its way. But also, I would say in more of like a shared space in the US, I can say that some states have their own insurance regulations or state-ran programs that shape how families access these coverages. And I would also say, like, it doesn't matter where you are. I would say we're getting to the point where our trust is being challenged between our representatives, our policy holders, and the community. There's not the communication between those two worlds are definitely like it's built off of trust, and I feel like our communities are losing that trust with our representatives, especially in our rural or historically under-resourced ones, especially when they have that financial strain, and that's just being much more intense for them.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's kind of going back to what Olivia said, the whole like I guess doomsaying and just because on all sides, and I think I speak for basically all of us when I said like the human experience right now is really hard just because of where we are politically and everything that we're saying basically day to day is just constantly challenging like our capacity for like to be happy in a particular moment because we're always like focusing on like what are our stresses and how are we going to be able to move forward. So I think in terms of just how we react or how we all, I mean, like respond across the board, again, we can all kind of share that kind of trouble, especially when it just comes to just if we just again break it down to a very speaking very personally to like an indigenous perspective, we have always kind of been aware of issues that are like this and have different ways of approaching it, but systemically those ways of living have been kind of like xed out because they've been considered primitive or been considered like not I guess researched well enough for all those things because like again when we talk about like how knowledge is disseminated between different people or just peoples in general, it kind of has to come from a particular place in order for it to be respected. And to kind of preempt things like climate change in general, but to try and preempt disasters is something that's super expensive and also to something that's not immediate. And so the biggest issue that I always kind of see, especially when it comes to climate change and the way that we deal with disasters that it's always we are always reacting that we are always on the back foot even though there are so many different avenues, and especially again the people on this panel who are doing all this amazing research, of being like, look, like we have these problems and these problems do exist. But we're always again kind of met with, well, we don't have the funds right now, or it's not happening immediately, or I have bigger issues. So those kind like we can't do everything all at the same time, but like everybody kind of hears this, especially in the environmental world, we only have the earth and we only have one. So it's really hard to be like, yeah, well, we can like wait another like 10, 15 years and we'll like put this in the ground and we'll wait another 10, 15 years. So it's just always yeah, hard for people to kind of like see the immediacy because we're always like once the fire ends or once the flood ends and everybody's like, okay, so now we can just rebuild instead of like let's create new avenues and new infrastructure to really like yeah again like as Essen said earlier just to create an urban interface that is built for the climate as it is now versus 30 years ago.
Yeah, I also just want to touch on, these disasters happen and it's in the news for, a few weeks, but then it almost seems like these communities are forgotten. And we saw it here in LA, and I'm sure this happens in the Southeast with hurricanes or in the Midwest with tornadoes, right? You have these disasters happening and there's this huge rush to help, and it's beautiful to see our communities like coming together and like wanting to help people that are impacted by these disasters. But then there is this kind of like down kick of the communities getting forgotten. And so I think we need to focus on like continuing to shine a light on these disasters and having them come up in the media so that people, still pay attention to it. Because I think there is this like normalization, right? Of like, okay, well, this was another disaster. What's next? And so, we shouldn't normalize that. We really need to shine a light on the fact that, communities are being impacted. Something else and that's a commonality, I think, across all communities, all disasters. And like we said, they're more intense, they're more frequent. So we kind of what Samuel was saying is there needs to be a push to kind of counter that rather than just, trying to follow up and trying to recover. And that kind of leads to like research, and our research is being defunded. So it's just this kind of cyclical thing, right? And methods to kind of at least warn communities that these disasters might be coming, that's also kind of on the burner. So but I do want to circle back to Olivia's point of eco like joy, because I feel like we do get in this doom and gloom cycle. So we need to be positive and work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to Kat's point, I want to mention that I think there's so much potential for how we can learn from like past like challenges and how we've responded, but like not just to improve how we respond to future challenges, but how we can better prepare for them before they happen and make sure that our communities have the resources that they need and that they don't get forgotten a couple days after the disaster hits and the news winds down. I think that because, for example, like in the Southeast, like we have hurricane season. It's something that we're used to like year after year, but I feel like it doesn't like this conversation about hurricanes and how can we respond to these disasters shouldn't just be for those couple months of the year, for example. So I feel like our conversations about climate disasters feel very limited. Um, and I feel like because of that, there's so much potential for us to expand the way that we communicate about climate related disasters and how we can kind of build from and learn from them.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue into what was going to be my next question, which also full circle ties back to what Essence you mentioned right at the beginning about that trust in our institutions. what is something that you believe these institutions or policymakers often overlook when thinking about how communities experience climate-related disasters? And furthermore, what have you personally learned from your own experiences about what that meaningful support or response should look like before and after these disasters? And then maybe this time we could start with Samuel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, so again, speaking from First People's perspective, it's kind of the in our culture so especially like in my culture and then even in my language, we don't have a word for nature. Like we just believe that again where we are, where we lived is nature, and like where we are currently in it. And so I think the idea that, and I hear it a lot of time, especially too when it comes to like policy work, the idea of like the great outdoors and how that is separate from where we live. And especially being in like in an urban environment, like I mean, trees, like trees and plants and everything like around us is built into it, like built into our infrastructure, whether we like it or not, right? Like a weed's gonna grow up, like you know, on a street, whether or not we want it there or not. And I think the idea of like we can keep these things separate and like wildlife or again like the urban area is drastically separate, I think is something that lawmakers are too keen to just go to. Because especially I mean like when we have, and again I can only really speak on fires at this point, but like when we have a big fire like this, it encroaches into urban environments. You're like, oh my gosh, how did it get this far? And you're like, well, there are all of these trees that are also in the urban environment, and there's all this life that is also again like dependent on what we have. And so the idea that we could even just keep it separate, like, well, the brush clearing is better over here, and like, you know, we you know are clear X amount of feet away from any of the like any structures is something that I think again like we need to be more mindful of. And then again, same thing too, just making it very cultural. But the idea of like keeping things out or like kind of trying to avoid um like avoid stress or avoid again like these issues is not a healthy way. And especially too, even when you talk mentally, like to avoid a problem is not healthy. And so the same thing too when we talk about land restoration and talking about again being ecologically sensitive. It's important that we engage with these things because again, like as we're kind of in a space where yeah, these disasters are going to keep happening. So, and as we've all mentioned, it's just something that we need to learn how to live with and mitigate and most of the time in an ideal world to depreciate as much as possible. But the idea of like we can preempt by keeping all these things out or creating structures like I'm going to have more water so that when it does happen, then I can just keep it away from structures instead of like how do we again get rid of all of this dead mustard that is going to ignite why are we planting eucalyptus trees when they don't belong in this particular environment, or why are we again like doing all these things that again should just be at a certain point kind of common knowledge or at least just accessible. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
I think something that I also like to include, and I agree with everything that Samuel said, I think he hit it right on the nail, is our I feel like with our policymakers and the people that are our decision makers, there is this kind of, oh, if it's not in my backyard, it's not going to happen. And that I think happened here in LA. I'm not saying that like our policymakers here, I think they are thoughtful, but there is a hint of, well, it's not our problem yet. We'll deal with this later. Climate change hasn't hit us yet, and that's a similar thing with like sea level rise and flooding, right? I think a lot of communities still haven't it hasn't dawned on them that eventually they will be impacted. So I think there just needs to be awareness of that. I think our policymakers also kind of have this idea that our resources are infinite, and they're not. They're pretty finite. So yeah, just kind of being more mindful of resources and yeah, what's to come.
And I would just love to add on to that because I think um, so much of like the conversation around climate like disasters are almost like blaming nature rather than people's actions. And I like kind of the framing of using climate disasters rather than natural disasters because at the end of the day, they're not necessarily completely natural because they are shaped by human activities. And, because of climate change, we're really seeing like intensifying, like worsening disasters. And I think that um, there's there needs to be like more, I guess, care taken into account when we like talk like especially in education or like other ways that we're communicating about these disasters is that it's not natural and it shouldn't necessarily be this way. And then also the environmental justice piece of it, where people are not being impacted by these disasters um, equally, and that it really does have a like very deep impact on communities. And I would say that I feel like the way that we communicate about climate disasters had like can and should really be improved to like take into account these factors of justice and the like how it really ties into a lot of like systems that do not currently work.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's great. Yes, please,
Okay,
Essence.
sorry. Just to kind of take from like everybody, kind of going back to our last question to hit on how our policymakers usually focus on that first 48 hours of an event, but they also most often ignore the months of trouble that follow these events. And they also overlook the quiet disasters that happen after these events, such as delayed floodings or mold that may grow in your house that may spike, health issues or that mental stress that we've talked about before of trying to rebuild, but also having that potential of like your insurance company maybe denying your claim after this event or recovery funds being limited. But they also miss the fact of like high insurance costs in general is just lacking that safety net or that protection that are forcing people to move out of these communities just as fast as a flood would. And going back to what Olivia said about communication, I would say on a highlight of this is that as scientists, as educators, as a society, we are doing a lot better in this decade than we have in the last decade on how we communicate our data, especially with how our community responds with backing up that data that we have been showing our policymakers and our representatives. So like some good examples like the hurricane evacuation decision support tools or like FEMA or like SLOSH, which SLOSH stands for like sea, lake, and overland surge from hurricanes. So those tools are also, I would say, now that we're having more frequent events, those tools are becoming more prevalent, but also they're updating more and more with more models to where we're trying to communicate in the best way to the general public that may not understand the data like we do as scientists or researchers. Um, so yeah, just to wrap up everything on that one.
Yeah, that's a great addition. And then I want to tie a little bit back and remind everyone that how CDLS is like this program dedicated to supporting and training the next generation of scientists, people who come from underrepresented or non-traditional backgrounds. And so, what I want to ask each of you is what advice you might give students or people who are starting out in their careers who want to get involved in the type of work and projects that you're currently a part of. And then maybe this time we could start with you, Kat.
Oh, sure. So that's a big question because I thinking about it and thinking about myself when I was, in high school, and science was so far out of my like vision. I did not expect to, yeah, be doing a PhD even. So, I think you just have to, if you feel inspired by something, then go for it. Weirdly, I was at UCSD. I took a chemistry class because I was getting into environmental science and I was inspired. And so I wanted to kind of merge those two things. And luckily, UCSD had that major of environmental chemistry. So I was like, okay, that's what I'm doing. And just kind of go for it. Just keep applying. My Yeah, from my background, I'm the first to go to grad school. And that's such a far concept to my family. And I didn't even think of applying to school. I was kind of encouraged to apply. So it's hard when you don't have that encouragement. But if it's something that you really are passionate about or really want to do, just try. You'll get no's and they hurt. They do, but you'll also get yeses, and you might get some feedback or something so that you can kind of go on to the next step. And if you're really set on it, you will find a way. Because I mean, I found my way here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, you just to echo that, you can never discount the amount of hard work and knowledge that you accrue regardless of where you are. And especially too when it comes to just any industry, as we all know. Yeah, the no's are gonna be super frequent and the work is gonna be hard and you're gonna be like, why does nobody know this? I've been telling people for years. But the best thing though is that like everything is a teaching or a learning opportunity, right? Like we are constantly students, we are constantly teachers. Like it is always super important to, for me, always just to collaborate. And the biggest part is like you're not in it alone, right? Like everybody is like, oh, if I get into environmental science, nobody's gonna listen to me, and I'm just a doomsayer. It's fine. But you have so many other environmental scientists who are doing the same kind of work, who are also invested in their communities and just having these similar conversations. And the last thing that I always want to just remind everybody is that like Mother Earth is super old and she is resilient and she is amazing. And as much as like right now, it's like you're not getting an immediate response on, man, I'm doing all this really good work and nothing's really happening. Like those things that you do now matter for the future and matter for the next generations. And Mother Earth will applaud you for it. And you'll see your work kind of grow in new ways, in different ways. I mean, like I had a life planned out for myself at 25. I was gonna be, like in a bunch in like not in this work. Like I really couldn't see myself here. But it's one of those things that like it's you if you care and yeah, if you're willing to just put in the work, like you will be rewarded at some point, you know. It is just one of those things that like good things and really amazing things take time. And just to kind of like again keep the faith and then also just have good people around you and have those moments of like things are hard, but it can't stay where it is forever. And especially too, again, it's where we are. It's not going to be like this forever. And I know a lot of us, especially too when we're doing research, it's not going to be like this forever. So it's always important for us to kind of keep that mindset.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just to branch off of that, I'm fairly new to this type of topic, to this research. Again, I've only been in this maybe for like 3, 4 months. So from my experience, the best advice I could give is learn and look for the gaps. Like learn where and how, if the information is getting across or how the information is not getting across to local representatives or to homeowners or just to our general public. I think it's really important to bridge the gap. Like I mentioned before, communication and trust is a big thing when we're trying to inform the general public about what's happening, but also inform policymakers that this is happening. But to add on to that, as a researcher and as a scientist, the one thing that I sometimes fail at is that I feel like data is everything. Like data tells the truth. This is the facts. Like you should listen to data. Data is never wrong. And sometimes I'd be wrong, and I can, that's okay to admit. But also get out into the community, get out and have that experience. Like, don't be afraid. Don't be stuck behind your computer screen. Don't be stuck behind R or GIS. Like, get out into the community, learn the locals' experiences, learn how they respond to these things. What are their responses? What are their ways of coping and recovering in their own ways if they are not actually getting that help? Because with the data and with their responses and their experience, we can add more to that full story to get the change that we are actually after.
Yes. And I want to add, as a current undergraduate student, I feel like there's it's never too early or too late to get involved with something that you're passionate about and interested in. And even if you feel afraid or you feel like uncomfortable or that's out of your comfort zone, do it anyways. Do it while you're afraid because it truly will build and your own so much. It's just like getting involved with things that you're interested in. And like, for example, like I was very nervous agreeing to be on this panel because I did not think I was like good enough or that I would like be able to offer like enough insights. But I'm so glad that I like am on this panel because I've truly learned so much from all of you. And I feel like it's like never let imposter syndrome get in your way, is what I want to tell to all of you out there. And also, like things that have worked really well for me is to do things like have coffee chats with like professionals but also with like peers and like people who you can kind of like learn from. And then at the end of each coffee chat, maybe like ask them who else they can connect you with so that it has like a cascading effect that you can grow your network. And then beyond that, I also really recommend like joining professional organizations. Um, and I feel like especially the ones that are free, or have student discounts because there's truly so many like opportunities that you can gain through those.
I just want to add one more thing. Sorry. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I know in my undergrad, like, yeah, again, coming from my experience as a first gen student, immigrant household, like, you don't ask for help. And so you have to navigate this all by yourself. Um, you don't have to. You can ask for help, and like organizations like CDLS are there for a reason. They're there to, help and guide you. So I liked what Olivia said, join professional organizations, go ask for help.
Yeah, thanks so much for adding that. Um, so we're going to begin transitioning to the Q&A portion, and I'll let Haley kind of outline that one more time before we get started.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists. What amazing group of people we have with us today. So just as a little recap, yeah, we're going to turn to the Q&A portion. So we do have a Q&A open. You can go to your bottom toolbar on Zoom and I believe type in a question. We'll take them in the order that where they're submitted. You can also use the chat if that seems more, yeah, natively comfortable for you. Or you can raise your hand using the React button. Also in your Zoom tool, I think we can allow all three options. So we'll try to take them in the order that we receive them. And then in your question, just please specify if it's directed to the entire panel or a specific panelist. And so yeah, I'll give folks a couple of seconds to get their thoughts together before asking questions.
Yeah, while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I would like to ask a question. And if it feels like something you have a response to, but it's not necessarily directed at anyone. But I'm wondering what is kind of the takeaway that, you agreed to this panel, you presented all of like this amazing experiences that you've had. What is something that you would like us as the audience to leave this panel with if you had to pick one thing?
So just one thing, Matthew? Just one? Okay. It's fine. Yeah, so if we're talking about one thing, true resilience only happens when we advocate for policies that protect everyone and not just those who can afford it. And I am going to break the rules, I'm going to say a couple more things. But also, um, I also want us to realize as a community, as educators, as a society, that protecting our coast, and I'm going to speak just for the southeast side, but protecting our coast is not just building stronger walls or building better drainage systems. It's about making sure that when a disaster happens, that the financial and social systems are strong enough to keep our families and our communities together, in that safety net within their homes and their community. And just for our policymakers out there, like, make sure that you are at least putting in some like comments into like what's happening in your local towns or local communities because your voices do matter. But also in means of hurricane and flooding insurance, which is what I particularly focus on. I feel like insurance coverage or coverage in general, no matter where you are, should be more of a public necessity rather than a luxury. And I think our voices really need to speak on that more.
I'll repeat the question for everybody, and this is directed for everybody on the panel. What individuals, organizations, or professionals have been most helpful to CDLS in terms of your community outreach?
Um, I honestly want to give a shout out to Thriving Futures, honestly. I feel like this is, I mean, not necessarily outreach, but I feel like getting the word out there is very important and having our community members and just people that want to learn more about what we may know and what they don't know, is also very important and impactful. In means of individuals or professionals, we have multiple programs within CDLS alone that cover different things. So, like climate futures or the policy working group, we're actually talking with policymakers or going out there and hearing about what's happening out in these states about our environment and science policy. So, there's many organizations that we have through CDLS that does help with that.
Yes, and I love to spotlight one in particular, which is Climate Future Studio, because that was how I got involved with CDLS. And every year they host a climate storytelling artist cohort where they um, have a group of incredible like artists who work in all different medium, um, create artwork that's a reflection of kind of visions of a climate future where we got it right, like a resilient climate future in the year 2075. And I think that this is so helpful for community outreach because it really brings a lot of that joy into our work and shows a positive side of climate science and climate communication that we don't see a lot. And so that's one that I love to highlight. I think it's such a special form of community outreach and connection.
Great. And then would also love to shout out to LA Climate Week. They are helping us sponsor this event. And I know that a few of you heard about this event through LA Climate Week. And so we are glad we were able to partner with them to again expand the voices that our panelists can have today and get community involvement. And while we're at it, since you both mentioned Climate Futures, I believe they also have an event that they're going to do with LA Climate Week. So if that's something that interests you, um, please be on the lookout for that event as well. We have a few more minutes, so if anyone else has any questions, love to take them, or if there's anything our panelists would like to elaborate on, share more detail about. Um, we have a few more minutes to do so.
I would just like to say, just kind of branching it in some ways to the research that I do, a lot of the work that I did for the wildfires came as a result from AB 617, so Assembly Bill 617 in California. And it was a means to look at air pollution in disadvantaged communities or just where pollution is impacting communities a lot. And that was in, the station I was looking at was at East LA in Huntington Park. So I would just advocate more for, we need more, utilities and tools so that we can kind of address these issues, right? We used it as a means to look at the fires, but that community is being impacted by, or was impacted by, the Exide battery facility. So there was just this huge emission of lead and other toxic chemicals that was being emitted in these communities. And if it wasn't for, that community and community members rising up and trying to get a data center so that they could, show that these pollution levels are high. And yeah, so just advocate for communities and sampling.
Another question for our panel. What is the greatest challenge or advice you have for sharing a community story or perspective?
I can take this one, or at least just first. Um, the biggest hurdle is always walking the line ethically about whether or not it's extractive or it's like, there to shine a light on what's going on. Because especially when we talk about like community specifically, everything that's happening to them is very personal. And so it's hard to sometimes be like, kind of it's the kind of like the line of like journalism, right? When you're like, people should know what's happening, but at the same time, like that's happening to like somebody's life, like that their whole life is wrapped up in what's happening, and like it might be helpful, but sometimes how you go about it is really crucial. And especially too, when I mean, just talking about like Native peoples, when we talk about like traditional ecological knowledge and like indigenous sovereignty and all those things, historically and systemically, it's always been very extractive. And so when we talk about like working with communities, it's always important to include the community in what you're doing, and doing that in every way that's respectful as possible. So like not necessarily like throwing a camera in their face, but like asking first, hey, can I interview you? Or like all those things, right? Or like I'm doing this data, or like I'm doing this research. It's always important to keep in mind the sensitivity of it, just because it's always so crucial that we as people like recognize that, when we're going through these disasters, like there's so much history in those homes when they lose. It's not just a structure loss. Like there's so many different stories in that house, and every time we work with the land, we should be respectful and like all those things like that. So it's really important to um, really tactfully make sure that like how you are generating research, or how you are generating a story to tell other people, or to like, create a platform, is going about that in the right way and in a good way. It'd be my first, yeah.
All right. Anyone have a last note or? Okay. So that's about the time that we have today. I want to thank you all again for attending our Thriving Futures panel, and a special thank you to our panelists, Essen, Samuel, Kat, and Olivia. We appreciate all the insight you provided and want to thank you again for all the work that you have done and are doing in this space. I'm going to put up the introductory slide again. So if you came a little bit later, we ask that you can fill out this quick little survey. It's like 3 questions, just so we can hear a little bit more about how you found out about us and how we can continue supporting programs like this. And lastly, today's roundtable was made possible by CDLS. I want to bring it to people's attention that due to federal funding cuts, CDLS may no longer be able to support programming like the Thriving Futures series. If you enjoyed today's discussion and would like to see more of these events, we ask that you consider donating to CDLS. I'll put a link in the chat right now. Or feel free to email us, cdls@ucla.edu, or even stick around a little bit after we conclude here if you have any questions. But again, thank you so much for attending. We appreciate having you here. And one quick note for our panelists, if you're able to, please stick around for just one more minute so we can take a picture. All right, but thank you all.